Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Steph and I am a therapist, a mindfulness facilitator and a yoga facilitator, among other things. Today I wanted to talk to you about trauma and how I have gained my own perspective on trauma and how to heal trauma through the practices of yoga, meditation, and self-awareness. In my past, I have worked with kids who have complex trauma. So usually young people aged between 11 and 17. And I had no idea what trauma was before I worked with these kids. I was working on myself. I was working as a yoga and meditation facilitator. I think I had been teaching for about maybe a year or so, not very long. And I was just learning about spirituality and spiritual awakening. I had experienced a spiritual awakening and I had really connected to that inner stillness within my being, which I believe and know to be the core of who we are as spiritual beings, as infinite beings. So this was where I was at the time, and then I was led to start to work with these people who were deeply, who had experienced very challenging childhoods. They had been abused, neglected, in domestic violence, come from families which had experienced domestic violence, and so these kids that I was working with had. They were labelled as having complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And at the time, like I was saying, I was also doing a lot of work on myself. I was doing a lot of emotional work. After I had my spiritual awakening, I had recognized the link between my thoughts, becoming aware of my thoughts, my reoccurring thoughts, and their link to my childhood, and how there was I was storing old emotions and old repressed experiences within my body, and it was playing out in my present moment, in my current life. And so I had started going back and healing these old aspects of myself, so that I could integrate those old experiences so that I could be more present in my day-to-day life. Because often when our mind takes us back to these old memories, it robs us of being in the present moment. So when we heal these old aspects of self, it allows us to be more grounded in the present moment in our day-to-day life. This was the way that I saw it at the time anyway. Things have changed since then. So when I started working with these teenagers, I started realizing what this was, what trauma was. And I remember one of my neighbors gave me something, an information, like a fact sheet on trauma, because I was working with these kids and I didn't understand what I didn't understand their behaviors or why they were acting to such extreme lengths. And so she gave me this information, and it was all about the ABC framework, which is talking about the actions, behaviors, I can't remember it right now, but it's a framework around trauma and why kids act the way they do. And it talks about trauma and how it's created and how you respond as a result of these past traumas. Then you respond, and then I can't remember it, so I won't bring that into it too much. But yeah, and so what happened when she gave me this information is I had tears starting to come down my eyes, because I recognized the link between my own healing and what I was experiencing and what these kids were experiencing, but from very different spectrums. So obviously my spectrum was not as extreme as what they were experiencing. So what I was witnessing in these kids with complex trauma is that they had basically barely any ability to control their emotions. They were very impulsive. They would experience rage, anger on a day-to-day basis, and they would openly express it. They were very aggressive, very angry, very abusive, verbally abusive, very distrusting. Majority of these kids had attachment disorders, and that was the root of their traumas, which I'm not sure about other people's experiences, but in my own experience, this is what I've observed to be, really at the core wound of a lot of people's, of trauma is attachment trauma, not being able to feel trust of others, trust in a loving home environment, trust that you will be loved and supported. And I see that attachment as a very core issue of trauma. And so, they had a lot of distrust, a lot of trust issues. They were very violent. Everybody reacts differently, but these specific kids a lot of them were in out-of-home care. So they were in the foster care system or in they were, kids of the state. So the parents had given up these kids. Because their behaviours were so challenging. So obviously, kids who are more reserved, some kids are more aggressive and they act out their traumas in very aggressive and overt ways. Other kids, which I experienced when I was a school teacher, they make themselves more invisible, which is probably what I have also a tendency to do, is to make themselves invisible and they don't cause conflict. So they don't get very seen. They hide themselves. So they don't openly express their trauma. It's more internal. And so those kind of kids you wouldn't see, I didn't really see, but I know that it can go the other way. And I'm not sure if this makes 100% sense, but so to give you a bit of an outline of what trauma is and how it develops in the body. So in my experience of working with these kids, a lot of them, because they'd had come from such difficult homes, they had attachment issues. They couldn't trust their parents to look after them. They were abandoned. They were neglected. And so they don't trust the world around them. And basically, these old wounds of, for example, abandonment and neglect, they are things that they experience from a very young age. And those old emotions are still stored in their body. They may have experienced a very extensive experiences, life-threatening situations in their lives. And as a result of not being able to feel safe in their upbringing, they have consequently carried that with them because they've not had an opportunity to express that emotion that they felt at that time or to be supported in that time. So they've grown up in a world thinking that the world is a very bad place. And this is what we do. This is how I relate my experiences in working with these kids on a very extreme case to myself. And see, I recognize through my experience of working as a yoga teacher and doing my own self-healing is that we all have trauma. It's not just, some have more higher degrees than others. There's definitely a spectrum. But we all have trauma, and pretty much all of us have abandonment issues. Pretty much all of us have attachment issues, because our parents didn't know how to love unconditionally. And some of us may have been luckier than others, but most, unless your parents are connected to their spiritual self, if they have a holistic awareness of self, and they're not trying to seek out love externally from them, and they know that that love resides within them and that they are already whole, they will always be seeking to resolve their wounds through other people, especially through their children. And so what happens is the children don't get their needs met because the parents are wounded and are projecting those wounds onto their children. So consequently, a lot of kids will have, a lot of people will have these traumas, and are not sure what it is. Most people are not sure that they even have trauma, or that it even matters. I mean, we're all fucked up in our own way, right? So what does it really matter? But it can help us a lot by bringing awareness to this and by working on healing ourselves. It can help us by, we can live lives that are more in alignment with our authentic self, rather than replaying out our traumas over and over again. So it really does serve us to heal it. As well as replaying out these traumas, we can learn how to be more present in our day-to-day lives when we've let go of these old pains and hurts. And it feels good to work with these emotions and to heal ourselves, because we then come into a state of wholeness as opposed to a fragmented self. So when we have these traumas from our past experiences, we leave an aspect of our soul back in that old memory. So if, for example, when you were younger, your mum left the room, all of your family left the room, and you were alone for a period of 10 minutes or so, and you experienced a trauma in that time of feeling alone, or that there was no one to cling on to, or you felt unsafe or abandoned, that old memory, part of your soul will still be back in that time. So when we heal these aspects of self and we go back to that time, for example, you can do inner child work, and you can go back and you can visualize bringing in people to support you at that time, and or to bring in your adult self to offer yourself support, and to tap into the emotion of whether that's loneliness or fear or abandonment, to actually tap into that emotion and release it. This is the work that I do with people, is to help people to tap into their emotions of the stored, where the trauma is stored, and to release it. This is the way that I work with myself, and it's the way that I work with others in healing trauma. So if you are interested in doing this work with me, please reach out and we can work together. So this is the way we can heal it. We can go back and we can do inner child work, for example, and heal those old aspects. And then when we do that, it brings that fragmented self back to the now, back into the present moment, and it creates a sense of wholeness, of integration. And Teal Swan is a really great teacher. She talks a lot about this. She has a process too that she does. I think it's similar to what I do in my work as well. So you're bringing yourself back into a state of integration. And obviously, when people have experienced very extreme events in their lives, they can replay that story over and over and over again every day of their lives. If it's a very intense trauma, they will have flashbacks. They will replay that event over and over in their lives, through their relationships, through their life experiences, and it haunts them for the rest of their lives. And I'm sure this may even be triggering some of you if that's you. There is a way to heal this, and it does take time. Obviously, this is where yoga and meditation is very powerful, to make sure that you stay in the present moment and don't get lost in the story. So when healing trauma, it's really important to just stay with the emotion, to release the emotion and not go into the story. This is my experience anyway. So yeah, this is some other things that people experience when they've experienced a lot of trauma is they have all of those experiences that I've explained. And yeah, I mean, there's so much to it. I'm just touching the, just the tip of the iceberg. So yeah, I hope that gives you some awareness into trauma and how it's yeah, and in relation to my life story and how I've witnessed it and why it's really great to work with our traumas, to heal them, so that we can come back into a state of wholeness and integration and into presence. So yeah, my name is Steph again, and if you'd like to arrange a session, an integration session, yeah, I'd love to meet you and to work with you. Thank you. Good night.